Here's how Xi Jinping and China in general just lost Europe. The real last hope of bringing kind of like the Western world into China's fold, that's over. Europe has by and large turned their back on the Chinese government. But it's been a scary lead up to this, and it's not over. In fact, there was a time as recent as 2014, and I know some of you might think that that wasn't that long ago, but it was kind of a while ago. And at that time, China could have gotten massive control over Europe. And honestly, they could have done something very, very scary with that power. You see, back in 2014, there was a very tender and vulnerable period where the current dictator of China, Xi Jinping, hadn't wreaked enough havoc on the world to make everyone kind of wake up yet. It would take him a little time to do that. In fact, when Chinese leader Xi Jinping made his first state visit to Europe in 2014, the European Parliament president at the time called it a welcome signal of the importance that the new Chinese leader attaches to a strengthened EU-China partnership. I know in today's world that might kind of sound crazy, what with the bad reputation of China kind of globally we have right now, but you have to understand something. At that time, China was kind of still in this afterglow of this gray period, I like to call it. It's kind of this period where people saw China as this liberalizing or quickly growing country that was only going to get better. It may have been an authoritarian disaster with one of the most horrible human rights records in the world, but it was getting better. That was the idea. So 2 leaders ago, so Xi Jinping, Hu Jintao, Jiang Zemin. Jiang Zemin, he may have had a quick temper and made people laugh or pissed a lot of people off, but by and large, he was all about those markets. And those markets were actually what the West was really happy to exploit and really, really happy to deal with China and work something out. Because it turns out money really matters. You see, hand in hand, the West's investment, together with China's cheap labor force, it brought China's economy from one of the lowest per capita GDPs in the world and rocketed them straight to somewhere in the middle of the world's average, which was very impressive. Sure, China was still an authoritarian disaster on paper and had an absolute joke of a human rights record, but hey, things were only going to get better. Hu Jintao, China's next leader after Jiang Zemin, the one before Xi Jinping, the one we have now, he largely followed the same trajectory. So why wouldn't, by logic, Xi Jinping, the following leader, do the exact same thing? Why wouldn't he keep China on that awesome trajectory? Why wouldn't he continue along that same liberalization that kept China climbing both economically and socially? I would know all about this. I lived in China during this entire transition, and let me tell you, the differences between leadership were stark. But guess what? When Xi Jinping came into power, I was also excited. As an expat in China, I could only look forward to more reform and opening, right? Being a foreigner in China, in a fairly xenophobic country, could only get better if the country opens up more. In fact, that's what I saw right in front of me. The more China opened up, the better I was treated, the better my peers were treated, the more friendship went around. And after all, it was declared by the party itself and people around, China watchers and people of that nature, that Xi Jinping was actually supposed to be more progressive and more liberal than prior leaders of China. So China was going to get even further away from the bad old days of Chairman Mao. You know, the famine, the murder and execution of intellectuals. But guess what? I think we all know by now that we were wrong. We were really wrong about Xi Jinping. In fact, we were dead wrong. We know that the perception of China here in the US took a quick turn when Xi Jinping started acting like Chairman Mao all over again, you know, Mao 2.0, but it really took him a little while to get there. You see, first, he had to kill off any competition within the Communist Party of China. And what he did was that anybody that challenged his leadership or anyone that kept kind of a lid on some of his most crazy policies was deleted from the party. And he did that through his great anti-corruption drive that really weeded out any political competition. It wasn't about corruption, you see. It turned out it was about getting rid of all rivals. Before he really got down to the business of going down that war path, of being complete and utter despot, he tried to get Europe to be this kind of quasi-pivot point for China. You know, a part of the West that could counter the US. The logic was kind of like this. Okay, I'm never going to get the USA on my side completely, but the West is not completely lost. How about Europe? Guess what? It almost worked. Go look at public perception data from back then. Europe was kind of split on China. Not good, not bad, but fertile enough ground for some soft power from China. You go back then in 2014 and you ask a British person what they thought about China, and only 38% of them had an unfavorable opinion about the country. Greece and Poland, France, Spain, you name it, they were all pretty chill with China when Xi Jinping visited in 2014. Only about half of the populace in those countries thought unfavorably about China. For God's sakes, Italy even signed on to be a member of China's Belt and Road Initiative, which aims to spread China's influence around the world through debt trap mega projects and also just make the world a friendlier place for dictators. We've seen how countries who have signed on to that definitely don't regret that at all. Sri Lanka. But that's another story for another time. Anyway, nowadays, 2022, you go ask a British person, 69% unfavorable towards China. Guys, Sweden is at 83% unfavorable. Netherlands, 75%, 3/4 of the Dutch population has a negative opinion about China. And guess what? Germany is the same. Germany, the country that is basically economically beholden to China, is the same. About 75% of people in Germany think of China as an unfavorable country. But it's not just about China though. It's about Xi Jinping himself. Nowadays, when you ask Europeans if they have confidence in the leader of China, the results are astonishing. I cannot believe how much things have changed. Just 17% of Hungarians have confidence in Xi Jinping. In France, only 15% have any confidence. In Sweden, 13%. And Poland has dropped to 11%. What the hell happened? Well, China really tried to play its hand way too early. It really could have just chilled in the background and slowly gotten people to kind of fall into the fold if it acted as a silent hub for investment. But nah, it got greedy. China really wanted to counter the USA, and it really had the chance to do so. But it started to act like a villain. Turns out, authoritarian dictatorships end up being villainous, rather than just acting like a boring, behind-the-scenes country that just wanted to peacefully develop. They really should have bought into some of that propaganda they try to peddle to everyone. You see, taking the Chinese government seriously and throwing billions of dollars in aid or cooperative projects or investment and accepting its shortcomings, when they have a clear problem with human rights and lack of basic decency towards their own people, it was always kind of seen as this necessary evil to get it to develop to a point where it could liberalize and then join the rest of the world and act like a sane country. But when you give the Chinese government an inch, it takes a mile. And that little respect given to this government created an absolute monster. China wasn't going to bide its time anymore. It was going to act like a spoiled little brat that got his way once and now expected everyone else to fall in line. China, you can join us in making the world a better place. Just make sure you keep improving your human rights issues and give your people more rights, okay? China's reply was, sure, be right back. China then proceeded to strip away more freedoms from its people than it ever did before, blocked a good majority of the internet from their own citizens, bullied developing nations with debt traps and promises to employ millions of poor people in Africa, all while trucking in their own workers and mistreating the local populaces. China then proceeded to destroy Hong Kong and brutally stamped out the protests, effectively killing all democratic process in Hong Kong. And more or less really just tore up the agreement that they had with the UK that had promised Hong Kong 50 more years of freedom. China then ramped up the cultural genocide in Xinjiang and forced labor camps in Western China, throwing over 1 million ethnic Uyghurs into concentration camps. Then, China adopted wolf warrior diplomacy, which was really just a ridiculous way to say that they were going to start acting like loud, hypocritical jerks on a public stage to get countries to bow down to them. That didn't work. China became a laughingstock and really just came off as a petty loser, pointing fingers and casting blame on other countries for their own shortcomings. This cry bully attitude really backfired. Not to mention the optics and PR of having starving people in their homes for months on end in horrific and archaic draconian lockdowns in Shanghai and other places in the country really didn't help sell the world on the whole China dream either. China now demands that the rest of the world pay it due respect and recognize the positions that China takes, without paying much regard to what others may think. This approach made Western democracies abandon the decades-long policy of helping China to modernize, and the rise of a hope that a greater economic integration will encourage China to become a responsible stakeholder in world affairs. Not only that, but China started bullying an actual EU member state, Lithuania, just for showing some diplomacy towards Taiwan, a country that China claims as its own. The language they used to bully Lithuania really showed the world China's true diplomacy. When Russia invaded Ukraine, China chose Russia, further alienating it. China even went as far to teach parents and teachers on how to educate children on why the invasion of Ukraine was good and justified. Setting the scene for a future justified invasion of Taiwan really couldn't be more apparent. The threats and pettiness were honestly pretty gross. And I'll be honest with you, that is the best word you can use to describe the actions of the Chinese government. Gross. The Chinese government is just acting gross and off-putting in general. This reaction from Beijing was not a wise move. China's strategy towards Europe was falling apart, and apparently it didn't understand that all of these actions, the overreactive sanctions, coercive diplomacy, and in the end, it worked against China's diplomatic goals and also pushed Europe closer to the United States. Allying with Russia in Ukraine invasion, though, I really think that was the final straw. China really couldn't afford any more bad press, and I think they really underestimated how all these countries around the world would come together against Russia. They tried this absolute farce of acting like they were somewhere in the middle and they were this peaceful mediator, but it was very clear to most people around the world on which side China had actually chosen. This really resonated with people on the ground. I asked some Europeans about how the perception of China in their country was changed, and here's what they said. In France, the opinion of China is getting worse. Intense propaganda from Chinese officials and pseudo-journalists did not help. Denmark. Much of the public are disgusted with the CCP. They're aware of the Uyghurs' plight, and they have much sympathy for Tibet and worry for Taiwan. Italy. The government has completely changed its attitude in the last 2 years, from the signature of the Belt and Road Initiative to total Atlanticism. Sweden. Public perception of China has become more negative for many reasons. Xinjiang, threatening Swedish journalists and politicians, and the backroom support of the Russian massacre in Ukraine. The UK. It's changed for the worse. People are much more aware of the bad things going on in China. Poland. The public right now feels like China got more expressive and even worse than Poland in its communist times. Hungary here. Went from neutral to admiration in 20 years and then plummeted to negative in the last 4 to 5 years. You see, both the data and the perception is alarming. The Chinese government is by and large not looked upon favorably anymore. But when I asked people if their government's actions met the perception on the ground, the answer wasn't as hopeful. Most people thought that either their government wasn't doing enough about China or was just rolling over for it. And that's the problem. Leadership in Europe may be different from public perception for the time being. There are voices in the EU that kind of say that they don't want to be held hostage to US-China relations and they want to continue to foster a relationship with China, proving that they in fact care more about money than human dignity and life. However, Xi Jinping just called for a high-level meeting with European officials, and that call has yet to be answered. And that's a big deal. With what we are seeing happening with the expansion of NATO and the fact that largely democratic European nations have the ability to shape and mold politics and international relations through their democratic processes, it means that the trajectory for China to win hearts and minds and political sway in most of Europe, at least in my mind, is lost. It's over. we're quickly entering an unfortunate new era of China, Russia, and other authoritarian regimes versus a democratic alliance, the likes of which the world hasn't seen in a very long time. China lost this one, and without some serious reform within the party and with Xi Jinping at the helm, it will only further abandon all future hope of reasonable action. I've got huge news! You guys are asking over and over again, can you please bring back the merch? Not only did I bring back the merch, I brought back the 3 most popular shirts. Number 1, the 差不多 shirt. Number 2, the 草泥马 shirt. And number 3, the Wu Mao shirt. Now, these shirts are only going to be available for a very, very short time. I'm talking like within the next few weeks. These are gone. So this is the last chance to get these. Go to everpress.com/profile/Laowai86. Pick up one of these for yourself, maybe get it as a gift. You definitely want to be in on this merch. Definitely in on the inside jokes. And trust me, you're gonna want to wear these when you go out. Appreciate the support, and I'll catch you on the next one.